Okay, everybody. It's straight up 2 o'clock, and we want to try to respect everybody's time and get you out of here by 3 o'clock. My name is Tim Kuhn. I'm the director of the Tennessee State Data Center, and I apologize for our audio and video issues that we might be having. There's some sort of a power outage at the UT Data Center, so all of our wireless and wired connections are down. So we're kind of having to do this with kind of baling wire and duct tape. But we still think we can get it connected, get everybody connected in, and keep this thing going. But if you have any issues with audio or video quality during the course of this presentation, just let us know, and we'll see if there's anything we can do. Unfortunately, with a situation like this, with the data center power outage, we're just kind of along for the ride. Thanks for everybody across the state for joining us. I especially want to thank Matt Freitz, Cora Murray, and Brad Harris for joining us as speakers today. This is a second webinar in our fall webinar series. We have a third planned in December that's about census microdata geography, which is not a broadly interesting topic unless you're a hardcore census data user. But I did want everybody to know that right after the first of the year, we're going to have another webinar where we'll release the Boyd Center population projections. These will be 2021 through 2070 county level population projections. And we'll be watching our newsletter and other announcements that come out about the availability of those projections. As far as this webinar goes, this is a really important topic. And thinking back to as we lead up to the census, a lot of the conversations about the importance of promoting the census and its relationship to funding. And often point is made that there's $1.5 billion in federal funding that is tied to this, $1.5 trillion in federal funding that is tied to the census. And that really highlights the importance of getting a complete count of our state's residents at every level and getting good participation from people across the state in terms of responding to them. But frankly, when we go look at the census, the federal funding formulas and how they're used, there's not a lot of direct ties between population and the disbursement of those monies. Oftentimes, it's more things like a program eligibility that's impacted, the calculation of a reimbursement rate, or maybe like a designation of an urban and rural county. So we don't always get to see those real direct lines. But at the state level in Tennessee, that's a different story. There's very direct lines with respect to the disbursement of state shared revenues, which are things like state sales tax and gasoline tax distribution. And these are very directly tied to a city or county's population. So that's why all this talk before the census, we talk about the relationship to funding. Afterwards, we need to keep focus on that relationship to funding and ensure that the data is accurate so that you get your fair share. That's really kind of what this is about. So we'll talk about that with Matt Freitz from the Census Bureau, but we'll also talk about the special census program with the ECD. There's some issues that can't be addressed through CQR, the Count Question Resolution Program. That's a state special census program might be able to handle. In some cases, within fast-growing community or when a community has annexations, a special census is a great tool to use to get an updated population count. And then finally, we've got Brad Harris from MTAS joining us. And he's got one of my favorite numbers for a municipal official to have in there, and that is a per capita state shared revenue number that you can keep in your pocket. He's going to explain to us a little bit about that number, how it's derived, and what it's looking like for the upcoming year. So as far as this presentation goes, or the webinar and how we're going to run it, first is please keep your microphones muted. Again, apologize about our audio and video qualities that we're having with the data center outage here at UT. But please keep your microphones muted. We are trying to record this presentation so that we can post it later. You'll receive an email with information about where to obtain that presentation, where to view it shortly after this concludes. We are going to have the chat open. So there's a chat button at the top of your screen in Teams. Feel free to open that up. Please submit your questions for our speakers into that chat window. We will pull those out of there, and then we'll feed them to the speakers as needed. And then finally, at the end, we'll have Q&A where we'll be able to we'll have Q&A where we'll open up the floor to additional questions in the chat. We'll send those directly to the speakers, and they can answer them at the end as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Freitz. Matt is the chief of the Count Question Resolution Branch at the Decennial Management Division at the Census Bureau. He's a pretty popular guy this time of year when the Count Question Resolution Program gets started. So Matt, we want to thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for giving me the platform to speak. And you're right. I am much more popular than I ever would want to be in my personal life. So I will take that as a compliment that what we are doing is important and impactful. So like Tim said, my name is Matt Freitz. I'm the branch chief of the CQR branch in the Decennial Census Management Division, which is the project management division here at the Census Bureau in the Decennial Census Programs area. So my area really oversees the planning and execution of the operation, and also, of course, wrangling all of our stakeholders that are going to have a large part in the research portion of CQR. A couple of things to caveat at the beginning of this. Some of the most popular questions that I receive are, of course, I've seen this in my jurisdiction. Is this going to be in scope? I will not be able to answer that today. We will not be able to answer that until we start receiving cases and the evidence that goes into it. So that's going to be better answered sometime in December and after January when we actually start receiving cases. So I want to put that out front. Some of the other misconceptions that have happened as a part of this presentation have been that the communications that we have with the highest elected officials that I'll allude to a little bit later are only for the highest elected officials, but all of the documentation that we have that will be available will be made publicly available on our public-facing census.gov website. So I just want to put that out there, mainly because it's been two things that I have heard a lot of, and I want to set the expectations here so that I'm not falsely, over-promising and under-delivering. And I will make sure to link to the census website a little bit later in the chat. Okay, so what is CQR? Well, CQR is really the opportunity for governmental units to request the Census Bureau to review their census data for the 2020 census. It's going to look very, very similar to the 2010 operation. So if you were a part of that or remember that operation, then it's going to be very similar, and therefore the impact is going to be very similar. One of the reasons why the scope is what it is and why it is so limited is because of all the quality assurance methods that the Bureau implements, not just during enumeration, but also during post-processing, which is really where CQR is looking for processing errors that come out of these cases. Count corrections will be issued when necessary to the tribal chairperson or the highest elected official of any of the affected governmental units as part of a case. And all of our changes will be uploaded to the CQR website as a RADA, and that website is the one I will be linking to, but we will be posting those on a flow basis. One of the things that's really important about CQR, and Tim had mentioned funding, one of the ways in which CQR is impactful for future funding as it relates to the population estimates program that the census does. And really the goal of CQR, even in the limited scope, is to help improve the quality of that base that they use for the population estimates. And all of the changes in CQR will be reflected in those population estimates, but it is only one portion of the criteria that goes into the population estimates program, which is well outside of my purview. But I do know that it is one factor, one of many factors that goes in. So it is not a sole factor in determining those numbers for future programs later on in the decade. There are some things that CQR won't do, and we will not be revising the apportionment data that has already been sent to the president. And of course, we will not be changing any of the redistricting data that has been sent to the states at this point, as well as the demographic and housing characteristics file. So that's some of the limitations that we have for legal reasons that I'll get to a little bit later. We are not allowed by law to collect any new data. That's CQR specifically. That's going to come up in a later slide. And we're not the same as a special census, which I think is obvious given the fact that there will be a special census presentation right after me. We're also not a mechanism to address data concerns due to disclosure avoidance that is applied by the Census Bureau. And I'm really speaking to differential privacy, which has been a very hot topic. That doesn't mean that if you feel as if differential privacy has had an impact on your data and you want to request a review of it, still contact us and have that information and evidence available. It doesn't preclude you from being able to put into a case, but it's a matter of if during the research we find that it was differential privacy, that's not something that we can correct. And so I want to make that point very clear. So within CQR, there's really two types of cases that house three different geographic scenarios, I call them. There's a living quarter count case, and there's a boundary case. So the boundary case, which is the bottom example, and these are just sort of visual examples. The boundary case, of course, is looking at the legal boundary as of January 1st of 2020. And for a living quarter count case, we're looking at housing housing as of April 1st of 2020, which is census data. Within the living quarter count case, there's two scenarios that we're looking at: a geocoding correction and a coverage correction. And a geocoding correction is really looking at the geographic location of housing units within the census tab block for the specific case that is put in. And for coverage, we're looking for any housing units that were inadvertently omitted from the census based off of a post-processing error. And that's really, really important. So we are looking at coverage as it relates to data that we've already collected during the census. And if there's any processing error that took place, they're very, very rare, but they still occur. And so that's why we have this operation to be able to allow for the review of this, because we want to catch as many of those as we can. The other thing that happens during this is a lot of research that takes place, but also, we're looking at everything that is at our disposal in conjunction with the evidence that we receive. But again, the reason what we limit it to these processing errors is because of all the quality assurance processes that take place throughout the entirety of the decade and data collection, such as enumeration. So during the last year, as we have been trying to get OMB approval, which we are still waiting for, we had a federal register notice go live late last year, sometime in September and August. And as a part of what we need to do to get this OMB approval, there's a 60-day comment period and a 30-day public comment period. As a part of the 60-day comment period, we received a lot of comments based off of two things: basically the start date of the operation, which was really related to the delays in the dissemination of both the apportionment and the redistricting data sent to the states, as well as the scope of CQR, as many felt, given the challenges that we faced in this country via the pandemic and other things related to the census, that the scope of CQR should be expanded. So on the front end, we looked at the CQR date, which originally, way back in time, was supposed to start June 1st of 2021. Obviously, we're well past that. To accommodate for the delays that we saw in the field work, remember, the field offices had to close temporarily due to the pandemic at the beginning, and we've decided to keep the operation date at October 1st to allow for any of the possible delays with the data deliveries related to apportionment and to redistricting. And when we saw that those were going to be delayed even further, we decided to push the start date back to allow for these products to go out and allow for governments to be able to look at their data with enough time to look at it, process it, and decide that they wanted to potentially participate in CQR. However, on the other side of that, with the scope, we did look into the feasibility of adding scope as it related to group quarters, and that's really looking at considering administrative records that were supplied by the government to look at the population counts within group quarters. However, during a legal review, which is part of the OMB process, we found out that we are not legally allowed to collect new data, and that this potential new scope was considered collection of new data. And the census really has to have a finite endpoint as far as data collection is concerned, and that endpoint is considered when apportionment has been delivered. And because CQR falls outside of that timeline, obviously we're well past apportionment as we do not change apportionment. We are not allowed to collect new data. However, that doesn't mean that the Census Bureau itself as an organization can't look into the feasibility of perhaps standing up an operation later on down the road that can accommodate this additional GQ staff. That will be well outside of my purview, and I will not be planning that outside of informing of some of the things that we know or have seen during the operation to inform the people that are planning and eventually executing this. And the information that will come out about that will come out through the official channels that the same way that CQR will be coming out, federal register notices and all of that sort of thing, because they have to go through the same standards as CQR has had to up until this point. And this is probably the biggest development that we have had over the last year, and all of it has come around full circle to the scope of CQR staying the same as was originally planned way back before the 60-day comment period. That being said, what is the normal workflow for a CQR case? Well, as I mentioned, the data products come out, the governments see them, they process them, and they're looking at those published results. If a suspected error is seen with either boundaries or housing counts by block, they may file a CQR case, and my staff will be receiving those cases, reviewing anything that is sent in with the case, both for correctness and completeness, and there will be resources available to say exactly what we are looking for when putting a case in, and we will determine whether that case is in or out of scope based off of the criteria that I mentioned before. Any of the in-scope cases that we receive and accept will be sent to our geographic subject matter experts for research and resolution, and that's really where all of the work is going to be done. Now, we do hold ourselves to a 90-day turnaround for these cases, but that is of course dependent on the caseload that we have. So a good example would be at the beginning of the operation, we are expecting many inquiries and cases, and so we may not be able to meet that 90-day goal, but there will be a lot of communication from case acceptance to final case disposition all along the way. During that research, the staff that I mentioned, the geographic subject matter staff, will look at the evidence that was supplied by the governmental unit, as well as all of the records that we have at our disposal that tell the whole story through enumeration. And we will look for any of these processing records. The research may or may not find them. I said that they are rare, but they do occur. If there is no processing errors are found, no updates will be made, and the case will be considered closed. If they are found, they're addressed within the Census Bureau's records and systems. And then once all of that has been resolved, we will provide certified counts to any of the governments that were impacted by the CQR case with the final disposition for each case that will be sent to the highest elected official. And then, of course, we will be posting that again to our CQR website as errata as we go on a flow basis. Some of the key dates to keep in mind, 2 of them have already passed. One of the things that really needed to happen for us to be able to have CQR was the delivery of the 2020 census data to the states for redistricting. That has already happened. Those are the main data products that governments are going to be looking at in order to decide whether CQR is right for them. And of course, the Federal Register notice. And right now it is in that 30-day public comment period to be able to go through all that we had to do in order to figure out feasibility for scope and other such things, including responses to comments that we received. It took quite a while, and it was a lot of people power, so to speak. So right now, that comment period is scheduled to end November 28th, and we are still looking on track to go live in January, barring some strange happenstance. Currently, the timing for the Census Bureau to essentially communicate, it's a sort of an introduction to the operation and announcement, so to speak, to the roughly 40,000 governmental units that we have, the highest elected officials that we have on file. And we will be essentially announcing the program, and also with that will be a flyer that's a one-pager, both front and back, that has a little bit more detailed information on it. I just want to stress that while this is going to who we have in the database, that information again will be public-facing. The letter and the flyer will be on our website, so anybody will be able to access that. And in January, we are also looking to, we're going to be start doing case acceptance. So anything that we receive between now and then, including once December happens, we will be keeping those, and then we will be officially contacting as of January to start the process for an official case. And we will be accepting those cases until June 30th. So the January date is different, but the June date is not. That has continued to remain the same. And the end date for research and all dispositions needing to be out is September 30th of 2023. So what we're looking at is an 18-month roughly window for case acceptance, and then an additional 3 months for any cases that we have received or have been unresolved by the case acceptance period ending, and we need to have all of those researched, completed, and the disposition sent out by then. The other thing that is happening in December as well is our website is going live, and that will happen on December 1st, and there will be a lot of documentation and resources that are going to be critical resources for any potential participants to use. And I'm going to list those a little bit later, but there's also a call center that we will have go live, and that call center is going to be basically a one-stop shop for any questions that we will receive. It is tiered support, so if a question continues to be unanswered, it will continue to get escalated until it eventually could come to my office for resolution. But we have done everything that we can, including FAQs and so forth, to essentially empower the people that are going to be answering the phones to answer as many questions as possible for any potential participants to ease the participation in this operation. So where are we now? Where is my staff right now? Well, right now, of course, we're awaiting any comments that may come in during the 30-day comment period, and we will have to respond to those in kind, of course, when we receive them. As of now, we have not received any, but that doesn't mean we won't, because the comment period still has a couple of weeks to go. And we're working with all those interdivisional stakeholders that I mentioned. We're finalizing all the systems that are going to be used and all the documentation that is listed right here that our respondents are going, or excuse me, our participants are going to use, as well as all of our internal stakeholders will use. So the website that I mentioned that's going to be going live December 1st is going to have the documents that are listed here, including public FAQs. The participant guide is really the one that I hone in on. It's close to a 200-page document, and it is essentially every single piece of information that one could need to file a CQR case, down from how to find our data, all the way down to what you need to do with the systems that we are going to be providing, or the the software we're going to be providing in order to do so. And so that's one that I really want to hone in on, because that is going to be almost like a handbook or a manual for CQR for anybody that wants to participate. I talked about the flyer that will be available, the letters. Now there's going to be letters all across the way, of course, from case acceptance to case dispositions if it's out of scope. So there's going to be a lot of formal letters for a lot of different scenarios. And again, the communication is going to be very open. So there will be notes that will be sent out to say we've received your documentation. We will be communicating to say your case has been accepted. And if we need any further clarification or further documentation, then we will be in touch with you to say, hey, we need this, and work through with whatever we need in order to facilitate our research. And again, the website, which is where all this is going to be housed. Again, another really, really critical resource is that call center. I want to stress it again. That's going to be a lot of where the questions are going to go and the calls are going to go, because again, there's going to be a lot of questions and we want to be able to answer them as efficiently as possible. And there's 3 resources here. One of them was the CQR website that I mentioned. So while it is going live with the resources on December 1st, it is currently live now. It just has a little bit of different information. It essentially has the information that I provided here with a little bit more detail, including a fact sheet, some FAQs that we work with our communication stakeholders to have, because we wanted a place to be able to point potential participants in governments to prior to December 1st. Once December 1st happens, this website will transition over to having all the documents that I mentioned, including communication avenues, phone numbers, and emails, and so forth. If anybody wants information that the census has posted about CQR, the second link, which is ask.census.gov, is a great resource. Go and search for CQR, and you'll find anything that the Bureau has posted. And of course, the 2020 Census blog series, which has posted about data quality and the 2020 Census. Look for a blog post about CQR to come about between now and the end of the year. And, that's another good resource if you want to look at blog posts that have been done in the past that may be applicable to what you're concerned about. And that email address there, that is going to be the official email address for case submissions for the program. It is being monitored right now. We are responding that we, thank you for your email, but we will not be responding as far as particulars about a case until the start of the operation on January 3rd. But that's a good one to have there, because that's the email address that will be used to monitor all the submissions that come in via email. And that's my presentation for today. It's very short, and like I said, it's very high level, but hopefully it's been informative. Thank you.
Matt, appreciate you providing that overview for us. I know there's more information to come, but this is a good start to get people thinking about the types of errors that they might want to be looking for.
Sure.
If you have a question for Matt and you want to throw that in the chat, put it in there and we'll pass it along. He may be watching that as well. I'll just start with one, because we have just a couple of minutes before we go on to Decora's speech presentation. That is, you mentioned that there won't be any new counts conducted, and I think one of the tendencies is for people to go maybe and look for missing housing units and point out housing units that may not have been enumerated in the census. Is that time well spent for a community, or should they be looking more at boundary errors and maybe misallocated housing units in the wrong municipality?
So I think it depends. One of the things that I have said every time I present is that if you feel that an error has happened, there's no harm in contacting the Census Bureau and talking with the folks that we have. If you have evidence and you supply it, it may not necessarily be something that comes out in scope, but again, as my stepmother always says, you can't get what you don't ask for. And so that's why we have provided all of the communication avenues, because we can't anticipate everything that perhaps a government might think is a potential issue for them. So, I mean, we have received inquiries already. We've received concerns about data counts. So I don't want to say anything is a waste of time, because it doesn't necessarily mean that something won't be in scope. But I tried to caveat in some ways as best I could about the fact that when we look at coverage, we're looking at data that we've already collected. So if something was erroneously left out of something that was already collected, we want to find that. But I don't want to say that something is a waste of time, because if it's a perceived error, contact the Census Bureau. We're going to have all those communication avenues open, and that's why we will be able to talk through whether something is in scope or out of scope, and try to do the best that we can to accommodate with whatever, with what we have in terms of parameters that have been set up for the operation.
Okay, that's really helpful. If you have any questions, throw it in there. can you just, we have about just a second left. Can you just talk a little bit about this idea of maybe expanding in a future operation, a review of group quarters and what that might even mean for a community?
So I really can't speak to that very much because I know that what we were planning isn't necessarily what's going to be the end result. And because they're in it's a fledgling program at this point. So we were taken out of the planning of it. And the idea was to be able to, again, give the opportunity to look at something that's a little bit more in depth than what CQR is going to look at. And that's where the legal hangups came from, in that it was going to be a collection of new data, so to speak. And it was also going to be something that fed into the population estimates program. So that is something that I do know, is that whatever is stood up is going to feed into it. But as far as particulars, I really can't speak to it because, one, it's not in my planning purview. And also there are so little details on it right now because they're really trying to ascertain what the best course of action is based off of the legal requirements that they are going to be set up for as well. So unfortunately, that's going to have to wait until the formal communications come out, and that's going to be quite a while from now.
Okay. Thanks again, Matt. Really appreciate you doing this. If you continue to have questions for Matt, just throw them in the chat. If something occurs to you as Decora's presentation goes on, just throw them in there. We'll make sure we get those answered at the end. Now, Sally, I'm going to have you go ahead and try to start sharing your screen and sharing this presentation. So we have Decora Murray, who's a research manager at the Center for Economic Research in Tennessee, which is a division within the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. The State Data Center works with Decora on the special census program, and so we're excited to have her with us today. So, and the way we did this is we gave the option of recording a presentation. Unfortunately, UT's data center is down, and we're having to have Sally Avery with ECD help us. So Sally, when you shared your screen, you're going to present, did you see the button to share the sound?
I did, up at the top.
Yes.
Yes, I clicked it, and so when I start it, if you don't hear it, let me know.
Okay, we'll give you a thumbs up if we can hear you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Decora Murray. I'm the research manager at the Center for Economic Research in Tennessee, which is housed in the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. Today, I'm going to discuss our special census program. The Special Census Program is administered by the State Data Center staff at the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research, along with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. Both the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research and the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development can assist you all with any questions you may have about the program or any questions you may have about the process to conduct your own special census. Municipalities are enabled under the Tennessee Code Annotated TCA to conduct a special census to document population change between the federal decennial censuses. The state of Tennessee distributes various tax proceeds to Tennessee communities based on their population, as reported by the U.S. Census Bureau at the beginning of each decade. State taxes and other monies are shared with Tennessee's incorporated municipalities and counties on the basis of population. Compensation rates for certain public offices are also established on a population basis. The federal decennial population counts are used as the basis of these distributions unless a community has a special census taken under the applicable TCA provision. A municipality may choose to conduct a special census to get a recount of their population to document perceived growth or to resolve a dispute with the federal count. A municipality may also conduct a special census when it properly annexes new residents into their jurisdiction or becomes newly incorporated. For a citywide census, any incorporated city may take a special census of the entire city. Only 4 such censuses are allowed to be taken during the 10-year period. For an annexation, a community may include in its population base the residents of an area annexed after the last federal census by having a special census taken in the annexed area. Only one special census can be certified for the same area. For a new incorporation, a community incorporated between federal censuses will not have to wait until the next federal decennial census to establish a population basis. It may have a special census taken of the inhabitants within its boundaries. There are two ways for a community to conduct a special census. The first way is that a community can use the services of the U.S. Census Bureau to conduct and certify a special census. The Census Bureau may not involve the state of Tennessee to certify the new count. However, by May 15th, the community must provide to the Boyd Center an official notice from the Census Bureau identifying the area in which a special census was taken and the count of the area's residents. Another way is that a community can conduct their own special census satisfactory to TNSDC. In order for a community to conduct their own special census, there are 7 steps that they must follow. The first step is that the community must submit a letter of intent to conduct a special census to the Boyd Center, stating the type of census the community plans to conduct. This needs to be in no later than January 1st. The next step is that the community will then have to contact a development district to enter into an agreement that the development district will review and verify the community's special census. Then, the community can conduct a special census by taking its own enumeration of its inhabitants. Once the special census is complete, they then must submit the special census to the development district. The development district will review the census roster and conduct a field sample of the listing in order to check the validity of the data. Officials of the community may be requested to assist in locating boundaries or addresses. The development district must poll at least 10% of the residents listed in the census and have an absolute error of less than 5%. All documentation must be submitted to the Boyd Center from the community. Upon certification, the Boyd Center will provide the community with written notice of the approved special count in July. The types of documents required to the Boyd Center include a notarized letter from the mayor that explains the method in which the census was conducted, when it was conducted, the type of census conducted, and the total census count being requested for certification. Also required is a letter from the development district recommending the special census count be certified and included in the annual report. We also require 1 copy of the special census roster, which includes house number, street name, unit number, city, county, state, and zip code, last and first name for each person contained in the special census. If there are any group quarters whose residents are counted, a letter from the group quarters must also be submitted. We also request that a map clearly indicating the extent of the territory contained in the special census with legible street names be submitted. For an annexation census, please provide a copy of all annexation ordinances or the resolutions calling for referendum and the certification of election results from the County Election Commission. If there is an incorporation census, please provide a notarized statement by the mayor. All of these documents are required to the Boyd Center no later than May 15th. After the special census has been conducted and the community has requested certification of their census, the new population will be reflected in the annual certified population of Tennessee incorporated municipalities and counties report. The annual report reflects the municipal and county population changes and the new state total of incorporated municipal population. The statewide figure will be used to determine the per capita rate of shared revenue distribution. Certified populations included in the annual report become effective on July 1st of each year. Be sure to reach out to your local development district if you plan on conducting your own special census. Here's a list of the 9 approved agencies, which are all development districts. Here are some important dates for the special census. By January 1st, please submit a letter of intent to the Boyd Center. By March 1st, you must submit the special census documentation to approved agencies, which are those development districts, for review and field verification. By May 15th, submit special census documentation to the Boyd Center, and on July 1st, certified population changes will go into effect. Here's what our 2021 certified population report looks like. It is normally released on July 1st of each year. At the end of this slide deck, I have provided a link to our website so you can access the report on your own. The report shows the count of each Tennessee community from the decennial census. It also shows any special census counts that have been conducted within the 10-year time frame between the decennial censuses. Towards the end of the report, you will find the population counts for each Tennessee county and the state total population. Again, this report is available on the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development's resource page, and it's also available on the Tennessee State Data Center Special Census webpage. Here are links to additional resources for the special census. The first link is to TNSDC's resource page, where you can find the special census procedures document and all of our previous certified population reports dating back to 2015. The next link is to our latest certified population report for 2021. I also included a link to the U.S. Census Bureau special census page for communities who are interested in having the U.S. Census Bureau conduct their special census. Please note that the U.S. Census Bureau will resume with special census requests in 2023. And finally, the last link is to the State Data Center's special census page, which includes similar information that we carry on TNSDC's website about the special census program. But if you're really into maps, they have a really cool map of the special census count over the years. So I suggest you all check it out if you really like maps. If you have any questions about the special census program or how a community can conduct their own special census, please feel free to reach out to Tim or myself. We would be more than happy to assist. And if you would like your community to have your special census conducted through the U.S. Census Bureau, I have provided their contact, Michael Hall, at the Special Census Branch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you to Cora for doing that presentation for us. We have just a minute to take a question. If anyone has, I don't see any in the chat, but Cora, are you on the line?
I am. I just have a toddler who might scream in the background. Sorry.
Well, with our data center outage, we're all just kind of hanging on by a thread. Thanks for taking one. The one quick question is, and I might be putting you on the spot here, but say a community did a CQR. Would you consider that for incorporation into the certified population report?
Yes, I'll take that since I'm Sally Avery. I'm the director of the Research Center at ECD. Since Decora's son is home sick today, we will accept a change if the Census Bureau changes their estimate through the CQR program. We will accept that change and put it into the annual report. We just need to be notified of that change. So if your community does that, send that to T. Cora and Tim.
Okay, that's great information. That helps us connect all this. It's probably a little bit easier to do a CQR than it is to conduct a special census. So that's good information to have.
Yes,
Again,
and
more
it
if you have
sounds like
questions
it's
for.
less expensive too.
Sorry about that, Sally.
That's okay. I was just going to say it would be less expensive to have your population recounted by the census than it is to do a census yourself.
That is very true. Tennessee is one of the few states that takes this approach. If you are interested in looking at the state of, or the cost of conducting a special census, that there's a calculator on the Census Bureau's website that helps with that. I don't know if it's up and running yet, but after you hear our next speaker who will help you understand the benefit of doing a special census, you can plug in what you think your expected population is and see how those two things line up. So that helps us connect the dots a little bit. So great point. Thank you. We're going to move on to Brad Harris. Brad is a finance and accounting consultant with the Municipal Technical Advisory Service at the University of Tennessee Institute for Public Service, and he works quite a bit in the East Tennessee and Southeast Tennessee regions, if I've got that right, Brad. He also produces a really handy number, which is a per capita number on the expected revenues that a municipality can get both in the current year and the upcoming year. So Brad, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to join us.
Great, thank you. And first of all, can you hear me?
Can hear you well, ready to share your screen whenever you are.
Okay, let me do that. Oh, great. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint now?
Not yet.
Okay.
There, wait.
Yes, I can see it.
You can see the state shared revenues there on the front.
Yes.
So we're good to go? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the privilege of speaking today. And I saw a lot of people in the online there that I know, and I should give credit first up to Dick Phoebus. I saw Dick's name on the list, and much of what I am going to discuss, Dick originated. He was a longtime finance and accounting consultant for MTAS, and I think he had moved on by the time I came on board about 10 years ago, and so I was tasked with continuing what he had started. So Dick, the credit really goes to you. I want people to know that. So my part today is to talk a little bit about how this might affect a city. I receive a report monthly from the Department of Revenue. It's a massive report that has many numbers of revenues that have been received for the previous month, and so I take from that several of those numbers and plug them into a spreadsheet month by month, and I try to look at trending, and I have actual data for the prior year, and I'll compare that to the current year, and then I'll extrapolate out for the current year and try to look at what we might be at by the end of the fiscal year. Now, obviously, at this point in time, the numbers that I may have are not that accurate. I only have 3 months of actual data right now for 21-22. So the further out we go, the more accurate they become. So in about April or May, and March or April, something like that, we try to put together some as best we can estimates for the coming year on state shared revenues. So first of all, let me give just a little background on state shared revenue, and you'll see that I've listed several in this slides. State sales tax. Now that's not local sales tax. That's a portion of the sales tax that goes to the state, and then they return some of that to local governments in Tennessee. So we're not talking about the 2.5 or 2.75 of local sales tax. This is part of the 7% typically that the state gets, and so they return some of that. Gas and motor fuel tax, TVA in lieu is also a population-based tax, state beer tax. Again, this is not the local beer tax that's paid to local governments. And then new on the scene this year would be sports betting. Not a lot of money so far, but some. And those that I just mentioned, all 5 in that category are population-based. So that's where we're going today. And that's why it's important. There's also another state shared corporate excise tax based if you have a bank or banks that are located within your jurisdiction. There's a that's based on location, not on population. But those are the primary 5 state shared population-based revenues in Tennessee. So let's take a look then. I wanted you to see an example of what a monthly remittance looks like to a city. Now, some of these are state shared revenues and some are not. I just wanted to briefly see this. You see beer tax at the top. That typically in years past has been about close to 50 cents per capita. Most of it comes one time during the year, but there's another portion that comes a second time during the year. But by the end of the year, you should be at about 50 cents per capita on state beer, about 49 actually. State beer tax, business tax is not a state shared. Interstate sales is something fairly new on the scene. And I group that with state sales tax at the very bottom, which is the largest number on this list. And you'll see the per capita numbers that I have on these. But in the middle, you'll see 4 numbers: gas and motor fuel, 89 gas improvement, and 3-cent gas tax. These are all the gas and motor fuel taxes that in most cities go to the special revenue fund for state street aid. Some have it in the general fund, but that money is to be used solely for street improvements. And those are the state shared tax. The mixed drink is not, the occupancy tax is not. The petroleum special tax is another state shared tax that runs, well, up until the new census, it was about $1.99 per capita. That one's interesting because it's actually set in state law, the amount that's paid every month. And right now, I can't remember it, $880,533, I believe, something like that per month. So because the population has gone up, the per capita amount, where it used to be $199, looks to me like it's about $183 at this point. So that's what a city would receive from the state monthly, and the total of all those would be the amount that was deposited into their bank account. Many of them on there are state shared taxes, some are not. So why does it really matter to you? Here's an estimate from what I've explained already of how this all shakes out. The ones on the left are general fund revenues. You can see that they've increased dramatically over the last 2 or 3 years. State sales tax, 90, 102, 103, and I think it's even going to be a little higher this year, and I'll explain that in just a moment. There's the beer tax, special petroleum. I told you about these a moment ago. TVA in lieu of tax is a little different animal, and that's based on a certain percentage of their profitability and receipts. And I don't know of any way to track that other than when cities and counties receive their first payment. That's paid quarterly, and they should be getting that maybe this month. This money's, by the way, come to the local government about the 20th or 21st of each month. And when you see the first quarterly allocation of the gross receipt tax, you'll know the amount because it doesn't change by quarter. It's the same amount for 4 quarters. The sports betting, I just put $1. There's no way to know because it just started. We have no history on that. So you can see how this has gone up pretty well over 3 years. Now, when we estimate this, in this case, 21-22, we do our best to be very conservative about that. I would rather be a little under in this number than I would to give false hope and paint a picture that's not going to happen. The last number there on the right would be the gas and motor fuel taxes. And we saw some pretty good increases in these over the last several years. If you remember, we had a law that increased state gas tax over about 5 years. And so that made a significant difference. Bottom line, for 21-22, it looks to be about 153, 154 per capita. And that's why it matters. This is a lot of money if you've got a significant amount of population that has not been counted. Now, I noticed the lady before me had a slide on the certified population report. I am not sure that I had the latest one when I did this slide. I thought mine was dated August, but the last number that I saw for the new population for Tennessee was 3,991,827. If that's the case, compared to the previous year, we had an increase in population of 231,181. Don't hold me to that. That could change a little, but that's a significant change in population. Now, if the pot of money that cities and counties receive did not change, then somebody's going to benefit and somebody's is going to lose money. If you've got the same pot of money going to 231,000 more people or per capita, it stands to reason those that probably didn't make the average would lose money and those that were at or above it would make money. However, I don't really think that's going to be the case this year. And here's why. If you look at my projection for state sales tax, almost to the right, the 3 months in for this year, state sales tax is up 23.31% over the same 3 months last year. And gas and motor fuel tax is up 8.34. This is just month over month, comparing this year to last year. And what I do early on in the year, I will extrapolate out for 12 months, but I'll be very conservative. So where I'm saying 23 right now, I'm using 16. I think I used maybe 16% for the months that we haven't collected, just trying to be conservative. And so I'm estimating that based on that we may be around 112, 113 for state sales tax, and more like 35.50 or so for gas and motor fuel. And again, that's about as accurate as I know to be on this. Every month that we get actual data, this becomes slightly more accurate. Of course, obviously toward the end of the year, it's much more accurate. So what if your population is undercounted by 100 people in my scenario? Well, $156 total, that's $15,600. What if it's 1,000 people? I mean that equates to $156,000 that you're losing because of the population. 10,000, you're $1.5 million. So that's why we're here today, and that's why we're talking about this. And one of the others has said, if you think there's an issue, then perhaps it's time to do it, or you need to do a special census. But these are just raw numbers, and I'm almost done. Actually, I don't have that much of a presentation, but some key things for us to think about. It's crucial because for every person not counted, you stand to lose about $156 as we see it right now. And not only state shared revenues, but there are other monies that local governments receive that are tied to population, some grant funding and other things like that are based on the amount of citizens that you have in your jurisdiction. On a minor note, some fees, I know that when I attend the GFOA conference, the conference fee or the membership fees and all that we pay are based on your population. As you know, political offices, redistricting and such are all affected by population. But my last point is one of my most important, I think. And whatever your population count is, that's what you have to live with for 10 years. So the numbers I showed, 15,600, whatever, 156,000. If you have a miscount and you don't do anything about that, then you multiply that by 10. And that's the effect that it's had on your local government. So this is something that we need to take very seriously. And I just wanted to paint a small picture there to you for what it might look like. And with that, I'll give you my last slide, which just simply has my name and email and phone number. If I can answer any other questions for you going forward or help you in any way with these numbers, then I want you to feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I'll yield back the remainder of my time, which is 1 minute.
I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, Brad.
Hey, Tim, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Oh, I was having quite a good conversation. Thanks. What I was going to say for the next few minutes is, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I've got one question to start for Brad to kind of wrap his portion up. But following that question, go ahead and raise your hand. There's a raise your hand button inside Teams. Raise your hand. You can unmute and ask your question if you'd like to do it that way. Brad, you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen. Brad, the question I had for you is, I was watching some of the news about the state funding board met yesterday, and their projections for revenue for the state kind of are conservative as well going forward. They don't expect that revenues will stay this high long term. How often are you updating the number? Just to be clear, how often are you updating the number that is published on the MTAS website?
I'll do that 2 or 3 times a year. I don't do it monthly because I just don't want it to be jumping everywhere, but I'll probably do it in December, maybe early January, and then March, April again. And then when we have clear numbers around June, I'll do it for a 3rd time.
Okay, that's helpful. So keep an eye on that throughout the year. It does fluctuate a little bit. I look at it throughout the year because I think it's a very handy number to know, especially when we're talking about promoting the census in 2020. I use this number quite a lot because it provides meaning to each person that is counted in the census. If you do have any questions, again, raise your hand or type in the chat. As we begin to start thinking about closing out this webinar, one of the things that I wanted to let you know about is we have a few cases that we think qualify for CQR here in the state of Tennessee. So we may share those in kind of the post-conference materials that we send you. So you'll be able to see kind of what the types of areas that you may want to look for with respect to some real world census data and some actual locations in Tennessee. I know, I think it's the town of Whiteville or White Pine. I think it's White Pine. Had a prison located in the wrong location. So they missed almost 2,000 people. So that was a big miss for them. Second is that we have some online resources that we'll share, including a presentation from the city attorney in the town of Franklin, who kind of talks through not just some of the costs, but some of the ideas about how to collect population counts. Her name is Shauna Billingsley, and she's got a great presentation that is worth watching when it comes to thinking about how to conduct a special census as a municipality. Okay, so I do see a question from Tisha. If you want to just unmute and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Can.
Where we live, of course, is the city of Comont. It's a very rural area. And our 911 addresses versus our mailing addresses. That's our biggest problem. People who live in the city limits of Comont gets their mail from Tracy City. So when the census is turned in, that's showing up. We're losing those people to Tracy City because of that address. And just like if there's an emergency here lately, and the ambulances are being sent to Tracy City because of that address, when really they're in Comont. These people are not receiving their packages, like their medicines and everything, because of that. But we're also losing these people to the other city because of that address.
Okay, so Tisha, let's do 2 things. One is, why don't you and I plan to get together and talk online and actually look at the data? Okay. Second is, Matt, are you still online?
I am.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the relationship between addresses and city limits and how those function in terms of census quality?
I'm actually not an expert in that, so you do not want to hear that from me. That would be not, yeah, that would not be appropriate, because I'm really over the planning of CQR, and as far as data quality and how all of that is done, that falls well outside of my expertise range, so it would not be appropriate.
Well, let me ask you this: if in Colmont we found that the city limit was incorrect, and the map did not match its corporate limits, is that something that they could submit?
So that would be, excuse me, that would be considered like a boundary change. So you'd want to put in the evidence as long as the boundary was, again, as of January 1st of 2020. So that would be considered something that you'd want to look at. And if it was an in-scope case for a boundary case, any changes that were made would then have associated housing changes to go with it as well. It just depends on whatever evidence is put in, what we have in terms of resources here at the Census Bureau, because obviously we're tracking through BAS and other sorts of programs. So we're going to be looking at the entire lineage of it in conjunction with what we have. So if you feel that a city limit is off, that would be considered a boundary. So you'd want to put that in and at least contact the Census Bureau about it just to see.
Okay. Tisha, does that help you at all? And again,
Well, our city limits is correct. It's just like my mom lives in the middle of Comont. She lives about 3/10 of a mile from our post office. If she wants to get mail by route, her mail will come from 10 miles away when the post office is just behind her because of that Tracy City route comes through our city.
Got it. So we'll there's the master address file that the Census Bureau uses is, well, I want to make two comments. One is that the Census Bureau's master address file for this census is probably as good as it ever was, in part because of the work of localities in the local updated census addresses where they review the Census Bureau's addresses. We did a project with the comptroller where we helped review every single address in the state, over 3 million, to kind of audit the Census Bureau's master address file. They receive updates throughout the decade from the Census Bureau. And then when the 2020, you're in Grundy County, I think, is that right?
Yes.
Tisha? In Grundy County, the census invites were actually distributed by hand, and they enumerated every single address at the same time that they were distributing those surveys. So it was done a little bit differently in Grundy County to account for some of the issues with the addresses. And that was an operation called Update Lead. So we can talk more about that as well, and how those address issues come into play in rural counties.
Well, I will say that our mayor contacted, and he's in contact with the state representative Scott Desjardins' office, and they're really trying to help us get this straightened out and fixed, mostly because of our emergency situations that come up, and also our elderly people who get their medicine by mail. They're not receiving them because nobody can find them because they're in the wrong city. But also, we are losing. There are a lot of people in Comont, more than what you would think, and we're losing them because of this address situation.
Okay, I'm happy to have more conversations about this particular instance with you. Maybe we end up sending something to Matt. That would be a good outcome of this webinar. Any other questions?
Tim, it's Matt.
Yeah.
You just happen to have somebody who worked on the address canvassing operation as well. So I'm fairly familiar with what you're talking about with Luca, and as well as how we determined which addresses were going to go to the field for the address creation. So I do agree in a lot of ways that the address list this decade was very, very good, especially compared to what we had done before, given the expertise. And I worked through address canvassing all the way until the end. So before I took, actually, while I was doing this job as well. So I appreciated you saying that, because I have a little bit of expertise in that regard. But as far as like how these zip codes and so forth are done, there's a lot of intricacies that go into the master address file with DSF refreshes and so forth. So there's a lot of information and inputs that go into making sure that it's as correct as possible as far as reliability for different resources that are looked at in order to make sure the map is correct. So it's not necessarily something that CQR can fix, but definitely contact the Census Bureau about it anyway. And I can't guarantee that it would get fixed, but at least it's something to bring to our attention. And, again, having the information and evidence is never a bad thing, at least in terms of what I can do from my CQR perspective.
There are also federal programs where communities can submit their addresses, not just review them when the local update of census addresses occurs right before the decennial census, but they can also submit addresses locally. They can submit aerial photography. They can submit a number of things to help the count. But to Matt's point, it's address lists are not a thing that happens right before the census. It is an ongoing effort throughout the decade to make sure that they're good. And the state of Tennessee has arguably some of the best 911 addresses in the country, but so probably still working around the edges a little bit to get things all cleaned up. So if there's not any other questions, I'll stay online. Anyone wants to shoot a question directly to me, unmute and just talk directly. I'm happy to do so. I don't know if our presenters are willing to do that, but I'll definitely stick around for a few minutes if anyone else wants to just chat kind of informally. But we'll hit the stop record button and just conclude by saying thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending the 3 hours or 1 hour and 5 minutes. It felt like 3 hours with our internet all going down right before this started. So again, thank you. And I hope you'll tune in January when we discuss the population projections when those are released. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And thanks.